Last summer, I pulled just under 80 pounds of potatoes out of a single structure that took up less space than a card table. 4 square feet. That's it. Meanwhile, my neighbor dedicated an entire 30-foot row to his potato patch and harvested maybe 40 pounds. More space, more work, and significantly less food. When I told him where I learned the method, he didn't believe me at first. But this approach has been used by Amish families for generations to feed tables of 10 to 12 people from their own land. When you understand the biology behind why it works, you'll wonder why anyone still plants potatoes in rows. For 2 decades, I did it the traditional way, digging trenches, dropping in seed potatoes, and hoping for a pound or 2 per plant. I was dedicating a huge section of my garden to potatoes every year, never questioning if that was the best use of the space. Then I spent some time around an Amish community in Holmes County, Ohio, and saw something that completely reset my thinking. A man had wire cylinders about 2 feet across and 3 feet tall, stuffed with straw. When harvest time came, he tipped one over, and potatoes just came rolling out of the straw in every direction. I stopped counting after 50. This isn't just a gardening trick. It is a survival strategy born out of genuine necessity. Amish families don't have the luxury of wasting space, so they developed methods that grow vertically instead of horizontally, stacking production upward to multiply what a small footprint can produce. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to build and plant a vertical potato tower the way many Amish gardeners do it, step by step, with every measurement and timing detail you need. And stay with me to the end because I'll share a stripped-down version of this method using nothing but straw that you can set up in about 20 minutes. To understand why this method works, you have to unlearn most of what you know about how a plant grows. Most of us look at a potato plant and see the green leaves above and the food below, assuming they are 2 separate systems. But the secret to that 100-pound harvest lies in a specific piece of biology that most gardeners and even some farmers were never actually taught. It all comes down to something called stolons. In a traditional garden, you bury a seed potato a few inches deep. As it grows, it sends a stem toward the sunlight. But the potato plant is unique. When you bury that stem in darkness, it doesn't just sit there. It reacts. That buried section of the stem begins to produce lateral shoots. These are the plant's supply lines. Think of them as the plant's supply lines. At the tip of every single one of those stolons, the tissue begins to swell, eventually becoming a new tuber, a new potato. Here is the problem with the way we've been taught to garden. In a conventional row, you might hill your potatoes once or twice. You pull a little dirt around the base, burying maybe 6 inches of stem. Because you've only provided 6 inches of dark zone, the plant only has 6 inches of real estate to produce those stolons. Once the stem hits the open air and the sunlight, the potato-making part of its brain shuts off, and it switches entirely to making leaves. But when you grow vertically in an Amish-style tower, you're essentially giving the plant permission to produce fruit along the entire length of its body. Every time those green shoots peek out and you bury them again with your straw and compost mix, you are tricking the plant into thinking it's still deep underground. You are extending that dark zone upward foot after foot. Instead of having a tiny 6-inch window for production, you're giving it 3 feet of buried stem. Imagine the difference. In a row, the plant has 1 floor of production. In a tower, you've built it a skyscraper. By the time you're finished hilling, you have layers upon layers of stolons branching out at every level. You aren't forcing the plant to do something unnatural. You are simply removing the ceiling on its potential. You are providing the environment for the plant to do what it already wants to do, multiply. That is the science the Amish understood long before agricultural textbooks caught up. It's not a miracle, it's just vertical multiplication. Now here is the part where most gardeners fail, even after they've spent the weekend building the perfect tower. I call it the silent killer of this method. You can follow every construction step perfectly, water consistently, and use the richest compost on Earth, and still end up with a 10-pound harvest. It's a heartbreaking disappointment I've seen happen dozens of times, and it almost always comes down to one simple word: variety. In the world of potatoes, there are two distinct types, and they are not created equal when it comes to vertical growing. Most people head to the garden center and grab whatever looks good, usually a Yukon Gold or a Red Norland. These are what we call determinate varieties. They are genetically programmed to produce all their tubers in one single layer near the base of the plant. It doesn't matter if you hill them 6 inches or 6 feet. They hit their limit and they stop. If you put a determinate potato in a tower, the hilling does nothing. You've built a skyscraper for a plant that only wants to live on the ground floor. What the Amish have known for generations is that for this system to work, you must use indeterminate varieties. These are the workhorses. Unlike their cousins, indeterminate potatoes, varieties like Russet Burbank, Kennebec, German Butterball, or Elba, will keep producing new stolons and new tubers along the entire length of the buried stem as it grows taller. These are the only varieties that respond to continuous hilling by stacking production upward. This choice alone is the difference between a 40-pound harvest and a 10-pound failure. Once you have the right variety, the prep work is your next line of defense. About 2 to 3 days before you plan to plant, you need to prepare your seed. Don't just toss whole potatoes in there. Take your tubers and cut them into pieces roughly the size of a large hen's egg. The golden rule is to make sure every single piece has at least 2 eyes, those little dimples where the sprouts emerge. But here is the critical Amish secret: do not plant them immediately. If you put a freshly cut, wet potato piece into moist soil, it's an open invitation for bacteria and rot. Instead, spread those pieces out in a cool, shaded spot for 48 hours. Let the cut surfaces dry out and form a tough, leathery callus. This simple act of patience creates a natural armor that protects the seed from rotting in the damp tower environment. Once you've selected your indeterminate seeds and let them callus, it's time to build the engine that makes the 100-pound harvest possible. In the Amish communities I visited, they didn't use expensive plastic kits or high-tech hydroponics. They used what was on hand: wire, straw, and common sense. To start, you'll need a length of welded wire fencing, the kind with the 2 by 4 inch openings. Measure out exactly 12.5 feet. When you wrap this into a circle and secure the ends with a bit of baling wire, you've created a cylinder roughly 4 feet in diameter. It looks simple, almost too simple, but this structure is the key to your 4-square-foot print. It's the skeleton that allows you to stack your garden toward the sky. Now, before you drop in a single potato, you have to think about placement. This is where many urban gardeners trip up. Because the tower is vertical, it casts a shadow on itself. You need a spot that gets at least 6 to 8 hours of direct, unfiltered sunlight. Potatoes are sun worshippers. If you tuck this tower in a shady corner of the porch, the plants will grow leggy and weak, and your 100-pound dream will wither before it begins. Full sun is the fuel for this entire process. Once your tower is placed on level ground, you begin the nest. This is a technique I saw used to keep the growing medium from simply falling through the wire mesh. Take a generous armful of clean straw and line it inside the bottom 12 inches of your cylinder. Press it firmly against the wire walls, creating a golden nest or a collar. Inside this nest, you'll pour your starting layer, a 50-50 mix of rich compost and more straw. Some Amish gardeners will use garden soil, but I found that the compost straw mix stays loose and airy, which is exactly what a developing tuber needs to swell without resistance. You want a growing medium that feels like a sponge, moist but never waterlogged. Fill the bottom foot of your tower with this mix and you're ready to plant. You've just built a high-capacity vertical farm in the time most people find their shovel.
This is where the real magic of the Amish method happens. The moment when you stop being a gardener and start being an architect of growth. Within few weeks of planting your first layer, you'll see those vibrant green shoots pushing through the straw, reaching for the sun. In a traditional garden, you'd hilled them once and walked away. But in a vertical tower, every inch of growth is an opportunity to multiply your harvest. The process is simple, but it requires discipline. When those green stems reach about 8 to 10 inches above the current surface of your compost mix, it's time for the yield multiplier. You aren't going to trim them, you're going to bury them. Take your 50-50 mix of compost and straw and pile it gently around the stems, leaving just the top 3 or 4 inches of foliage exposed at the very top. To the casual observer, it looks like you're smothering the plant. In reality, you are triggering that biological permission we talked about earlier. By burying that stem, you are forcing the plant to send out a new floor of stolons. Each time you do this, you are adding another story to your potato skyscraper. You'll repeat this cycle 3 to 4 times over the next 10 to 12 weeks. By midsummer, your tower will be a 3-foot-tall pillar of life, packed from top to bottom with developing tubers. But there is a catch. Because this tower is standing tall and wrapped in breathable wire and straw, it is exposed to the air on all sides. Unlike the cool, damp earth of an in-ground garden, a tower is essentially a giant chimney that vents moisture. If you treat it like a regular garden bed, you will fail. I use the 3-inch finger test. Don't guess by looking at the surface. Stick your finger 3 inches deep into the compost mix. If it feels dry at that depth, you need to water immediately and deeply until you see moisture weeping from the bottom of the straw nest. In the peak of July, that might mean watering every other day. Consistent moisture is the difference between a smooth, heavy potato and a knobby, stunted disappointment. Steady water creates steady growth. By the time your tower is full, you've done the hard work. Now you just have to wait for the signal that the treasure hunt is about to begin. After months of watering and hilling, there comes a quiet moment in the garden where the work is finally over. You'll look at your 3-foot tower and see the vibrant green foliage start to fade. This is the signal. To a beginner, it looks like failure. The leaves turn a pale yellow, then a brittle brown, and finally, the vines begin to collapse and die back naturally. But in the language of the potato, this is a victory march. It's the plant telling you that it has finished its labor above ground and sent every last drop of energy down into the tubers. Don't rush this part. Those final 2 weeks as the vines wither are when the potatoes put on their final weight and the skins toughen up for long-term storage. If you dig too early, you'll get thin-skinned new potatoes that won't last a week in the pantry. Wait for the death of the vine to ensure the life of the harvest. Then comes the day you've been waiting for. I call it the treasure hunt. Unlike a traditional garden where you're hunched over a shovel, sweating and accidentally slicing through your best tubers with a garden fork, the Amish tower harvest is a moment of pure drama. You take a pair of wire snips and cut the baling wire ties holding your cylinder together. As you unwrap the fencing, the internal column of straw and compost, now a dense, root-bound monolith, simply collapses under its own weight. It's a literal potato explosion. You don't need a shovel. You just reach into that pile of loose straw and compost with your bare hands. You'll find potatoes everywhere. They aren't just at the bottom, they are nestled in the straw at the top, the middle, and the sides. It's a tactile, rewarding experience that I now do with my grandkids every year. They treat every gold-skinned tuber like a piece of sunken pirate treasure. But let's talk honest expectations. The title of this video mentioned 100 pounds, and as I said, that is a number the Amish masters hit with perfect soil, perfect sun, and decades of experience. But for your first year, be proud of 40 to 60 pounds. That is still an extraordinary yield from a 4-square-foot footprint. My own first tower gave me 45 pounds, and I felt like a king. By your 3rd or 4th year, as your compost improves and your timing gets sharper, you'll see that 80 or 100-pound mark get closer. Start with honesty, and you'll be pleasantly surprised rather than discouraged. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You love the idea of a 100-pound harvest, but you don't have the wire fencing, or maybe you just don't have the time to build a structure this weekend. For you, I want to share the most stripped-down version of vertical gardening I've ever witnessed. I call it the Lancaster method. I watched an Amish farmer in Lancaster County set this up in the time it took me to finish a cup of coffee. He didn't reach for a roll of wire or a 55-gallon drum. He simply walked out to a patch of bare ground, laid 4 seed potato pieces in a 2-foot square, and covered them with about 8 inches of loose golden straw. That was it. No digging, no soil, no construction. When the green shoots poked through that first layer, he didn't hill them with compost. He just piled on more straw. He repeated this 3 or 4 times throughout the season, building a soft, breathable mound about 2.5 feet tall. The straw keeps the tubers in complete darkness, holds moisture like a sponge, and creates a perfectly airy environment for the potatoes to swell without the resistance of heavy clay or packed dirt. When harvest day came, he didn't even use a shovel. He just reached into the mound and pulled the straw apart like he was opening a gift. The potatoes were sitting there, clean, dry, and completely undamaged. His yield from that one simple mound was about 50 pounds. It wasn't the record-breaking 100-pound tower, but the labor involved was almost zero. If you're a beginner, this is exactly where I want you to start. Because whether you build a reinforced wire tower or just pile straw on the ground, the core principle remains the same. Buried stems equal more food. Everything else is just a delivery system for that one biological truth. By stacking your garden upward, you are reclaiming your space and multiplying your self-sufficiency. Now, what I've shared today is a powerful piece of the puzzle, but it's still just one piece. If you're tired of the guesswork in your garden and you want a system that practically defends itself, click the like and subscribe button so you don't miss our next episode of Garden Wisdom.